And for our next panel, we'll be talking about program accomplishments and doing a little bit of a deeper dive into some of our own programs and what's going on in some of our own states. And so right now, what I'd like to do is introduce Troy Johnson with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Troy is going to be facilitating our next panel. So Troy, go ahead and take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you, Chris. We have a wonderful panel today, and they each bring a lot of passion for helping businesses and the environment. And they channel that passion through the programming that they offer, and we're going to find out more. So let's just get started here, and I will introduce the panel. We have 4 people: Jenifer Wittenburg from Iowa, Kaitlin Urso from Colorado, Tony Pendola from North Carolina, and Jenifer Dixon from Michigan. So thank you all for being with us today. And just kind of in order to maximize our time with the panel and to get to your questions, let's just get right to it. So panelists, I will begin by asking a question, then I'll call on you individually, and we'll go through a series of questions, and we'll finish up with time for either questions from the chat, and then we even have a little surprise. I think it's a little surprise, but it's a good one at the end, so stay tuned. So the first question, tell us about a unique program, service, initiative in your state that's been successful, and just to the extent that you can weave it in, if applicable, what type of impacts did it have? Did it have any special funding, extra staff involved? And let's just go with Jenifer from Iowa first.
Lucky me, I didn't know I got to go first. All right, thanks so much, Troy. So as many of the other states that I've heard about over the years, our primary focus as the Small Business Environmental Assistance Program in Iowa is related to air and air assistance. We have developed a variety of tools over the years to help with the permitting, education, training, things like that, as well as within permitting record keeping. So develop some tools for that. And then of course, for reporting and emission inventory. We have emission calculators and tutorials for those. And I was lucky enough back in October to present on our paint tracker program during the SBEEP technical subcommittee meeting. And I know that presentation is available on the National SBEEP YouTube channel. So I decided not to talk about that today and to focus on something different that we have done. And I feel it's kind of a fun thing that we've been able to do. And that is it kind of rolls over into our the Iowa Waste Reduction Center, which is where our SBEEP is located at, is covers multimedia. And so this program it has an air component, but goes into the multimedia as well. And this is our Iowa Green Brewery certification. It was one of those times where I've heard some other states stating that site visits were going down, and that was true for us as well. And we were looking to come up with a unique idea to do something that was specific to a sector. And we decided to choose something that was rapidly growing in our state. And that industry was the craft brewery industry. They also had a very strong trade association here in Iowa, the Iowa Brewers Guild. And there were a few of them located very close to us as well. So we decided to develop, instead of doing on-site assistance, which we had done with, small manufacturers and many other types of businesses in our state, we decided that the craft breweries didn't have the regulatory requirements as some of those did. There were some, but not as many. But it was a very resource-intensive program or industry, and we wanted to look at, what could we do for them. So we developed the certification program, and we started that by doing some communication with the breweries that were local to us. And we did a survey through the Iowa Brewers Guild and presented at their conference and got a lot of great feedback, and took a lot of time at the very beginning of this program to develop something that we thought would be beneficial for this industry. And I think we were successful at that. And to date, we have 32 breweries in our state that are certified different levels. We have 4 levels: bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. We have had a lot of great impact with these businesses. We've had a couple of them that have included us in their plans for expansion. One of them has used the Green Brewery certification in an application for a grant that they received for the expansion of their to a different location. We were able to sit at the table for another location that was planning their expansion, and they wanted to make sure that they were hitting all the different points on our checklist and that they could be a platinum brewery as they were going through the building process. So we sat at the table with the builders and the plumbers and the electrical workers, which was really cool for us to be able to do that and for them to take that much stock in what we were doing and appreciate that. So, so the checklist that we developed has 5 different areas that we look at. The first and most important is the environmental regulation side of things, and they have to be in compliance with all regulations before they can become certified. So we early on worked with the Iowa DNR here to come up with a way that they would agree that the facilities would be in compliance with the air quality permitting. And we were able to keep most of them under the small unit designation here in the state. So we developed those documents for them, so they were able to help them with that. Wastewater, stormwater, and then universal waste as well. Followed that up with the next category is environmental management. So looking at their tracking of how they're tracking their different processes, their energy use, water use, things like that. And then energy efficiency is the 3rd category. 4th category is water quality and conservation, looking at their water to beer ratio. And the 5th category is solid waste and inventory control. So as I said, this has been a very successful program for us. And the breweries are very interested in doing this, and it's been a great industry for us to work with. And they are excited about the things we're doing and really utilize our or their designation once they get certified in their marketing and things like that. So they get a window cling and a certificate that they can display, a digital button for their website, press releases are done for their facility, and a social media push is done. We have one location that uses our logo on their cans and packaging, which is really cool. And they're one of the bigger breweries in the state. So that's the program, the Iowa Green Brewery certification.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Next, let's go to Kaitlin. Or okay, so I don't know if Kaitlin's on or if there's just.
No, she's on. She just can't unmute herself. I don't know that she knew she has to sit silently in there. Now she's good.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to do. It's really hard. I'm just gonna put it out there.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I was hitting the unmute button and I was like, nothing's happening. Anyway,
You're good. Go ahead.
Kaitlin, Urso, happy to be here. Small panic moment, but yeah. So a unique program that we have in our state, I think that, starting out with a unique thing that we do is focus on one industry at a time with our proactive focus. So we're always available for assistance to all small businesses in the state, but with our 2 FTE, each one of us focuses on proactive projects for one industry at a time. So for example, I also focused on the craft brewing industry like Jenifer did from 2016 to 2017. And then I transitioned to the cannabis industry in 2018 through 2021. That was a longer industry of focus just because it's so new and emerging in our state. Colorado has a lot of cannabis, both marijuana and hemp operations. and they're really resource intensive. I'm starting my research on data centers now, and that will be my next industry of focus. So rotating through these industries has really allowed us to look at an industry and all their environmental impacts at once, not just their regulatory requirements, and give recommendations on energy use, water, air quality, waste, and then also create unique partnerships within those industries. A really cool program that I'm going to tell you guys about today is our CO2 reuse and capture and reuse program that I actually set up between a brewery and a cannabis operation. And so the last stage of brewing beer is fermentation, and the fermentation process, that's what generates the alcohol. The yeasts are eating the sugars, but a byproduct of that process is CO2 emissions. When you look at the air emissions profile from a brewery, about 98% of the emissions are CO2. There's some VOCs from the hops and things like that, but it's really CO2. So they're producing CO2. They also input CO2 into their process, but a lot less. They will only use about 15% of 15 to 20% of what the CO2 that they actually generate. And most breweries just have that CO2 venting to atmosphere. So it's just going out the window. It's a waste. It's an air emissions. And so I partnered with a technology company, Earthly Labs, who has a small capture device that can be installed at the brewery to capture the CO2, compress it down into, a cylinder, we used a 500-gallon CO2 cylinder for liquid CO2. There was some filtering that was involved, but essentially we captured the CO2 from the brewery. They used in-house the 20%, 15 to 20% that they needed for their operations. And then they sold the excess CO2, so continued to capture beyond their needs and selling the excess CO2 to a marijuana operation, who then used it as supplemental CO2 within the flower rooms. Because when you grow marijuana indoors, you're condensing the plant lifespan down from about 5 to 9 months outside to about 2 to 3 months indoors. So it needs all the same light and CO2 to perform the photosynthesis for the plant to grow in that shorter amount of time frame. So we were essentially taking the waste CO2 from the brewery and feeding it to the marijuana plants. And so having it not just be a waste, but turning that waste into a product, and that revenue stream from selling it to the marijuana operation created economic value for both businesses, because the marijuana business could save on the price of traditional CO2. And then the brewery operation is generating another revenue stream. They're not just brewing beer, they're also capturing CO2 and selling CO2. They're now a broker of CO2. And that's not insignificant. I mean, CO2 prices have jumped with oil and gas prices. And, in some states, it's upwards of 50 cents a pound. They're capturing with this system about 500 pounds per week of CO2 and selling it over to the marijuana operation. So the holistic impact of it, we estimated to be about recycling about 50,000 tons or pounds, sorry, not tons. Let me double check that. I have my note up. One second. Pretty sure it's pounds. Yeah, 50,000 pounds per year of CO2 just from this one small operation. And it brought in a new revenue stream to the brewery, and it was about a 20% price cut for the cannabis operation. And so as we rotate through these industries and try to become experts on each one, we're also looking at the unanswered question of waste streams and where can these waste streams be turned into commodities elsewhere within our state. So CO2 can become a commodity and used by another business. We're also looking at, programs where we could be utilizing waste heat from one business to another, things like that. And so it's this concept has worked really well for our program, being able to rotate through industries and become experts and then tie them all together and kind of really become an expert on each one ourselves. So we didn't have any special funding for any of our programs. We run off of 2 FTE and a 0 budget. We sometimes try to help businesses get together grant funding to try to fund some projects and things like that. This CO2 project, reuse project that we did was really interesting that actually we couldn't find any grants at all that applied to CO2 capture and reuse because CO2 is just sort of recently becoming even seen as a pollutant, as crazy as it sounds, at even the state level. You know, Colorado just got our first ever climate change unit established, I believe in 2020. So we're ahead of our time at looking at CO2 as a commodity and as a waste. Most of the waste grants out there are for hard goods recycling, not recycling air emissions, essentially.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's go to Tony.
Okay. You know, originally there was some talk about the RegNav tool, me talking about the RegNav tool. I'm kind of sick of it, so I think a lot of other people are. And the truth is, in 6 months, it will probably either be extinct or critically important. So we'll talk about it one way or the other later, and it'll have to be changed. So what I thought I would do is go all the way back to the beginning, because this is something I haven't talked about in a long time or ever. And you guys know a lot of my other projects and stuff. The very first idea I had after leaving air permitting, where I was a permit engineer for 2.5 years, was to help my small businesses navigate a particularly challenging new state requirement. Now, at that time, the vast majority of air permit applications were being returned as incomplete. So the clock didn't even start processing for how much time people had to work on it. It was just given back to the applicants and they said, it's incomplete, you got to do these things. The applicants were required to notify a local zoning authority of their plans in a very specific manner. And because it was so new and complicated, hardly anybody could get it right. And by that, I'm including not just the applicants, but the municipalities and even some of the permit engineers. So my solution was to create a couple templates. Now, these templates allowed both parties to simply fill in the blanks and check some boxes and know that all the language was proper and enough and that all of the bases were covered. So since I'm hoping to inspire you to create similar problem-solving tools, let me talk just a little bit about what it looks like. You don't have something to look at, but it really doesn't matter because the first one is simply a letter. And you know how on a template letter, maybe like a sample resume, a template resume or something like that, at the top, it might say, you know, Mr., Mrs., whatever, and have a couple arrows in there to show that you're supposed to put something in that blank. And remember, I did this a long, long time ago. So that's what I did. I just put all those little pieces in that should be in a business letter. And then I gave them choices for, you know, describe what kind of operation you're doing. And you would put that in one sentence and things like that. But basically, it was just a letter to the municipality saying, this is what I'm doing, and here's what I'm giving you. Now, on the flip side of that, because the municipalities didn't understand what they were doing because it was all brand new, and you know, we got 100 counties in North Carolina and a whole bunch of cities, and how can anybody really know? And it's just impossible to get them all that information. I would encourage in the letter that the applicants send them several pieces of information so they could read it if they wanted to. But one of the things that was required by this general statute was that they include a draft air permit application. So the flip side was I did a form that the municipality could simply fill in the blank, and then check some boxes, and they could say, I have received a copy of the air permit application, check. And then, you know, either there are zoning that apply, there is zoning ordinances that apply, there's not, it's consistent, it isn't, why, that kind of stuff. And then they can put their name and title and send it back. And then on the back of that, I put all the addresses and the proper context for all the regional offices and the local programs that it was going to. So it just made it dead easy. It's kind of like Dale was talking about, right? I think one of the things we do best is coming up with ways to help people comply in an easier manner, because that's where the rub is. And so that's what I tried to do. Of course, that tool didn't require any special funding, didn't require any advertising. The Division of Air Quality immediately started including it with their application forms, and they still do today. So 23 years later, you can kind of imagine that a pretty decent time savings for almost every permit application over that much time has produced pretty consistent and substantial resource savings.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. Let's go to Jenifer from Michigan.
Good. Shoosh. I was like
You don't have
holding
to be
my
quiet
breath.
anymore.
I know. Nancy told me I was doing a good job, so I feel pretty good about that. So I appreciate being able to go last in a way, because even though we kind of got together without Kaitlin, but just to kind of talk through what we were going to talk about, it's really interesting to hear how the rest of the states kind of do things. And I love hearing people's success stories, because as I saw Jenifer writing some stuff down and all the questions being asked, like, this is how we learn, right? So as you guys all know, all of our programs are different. And I know we kind of flashed a slide up about how every program is set up that's here talking to you this afternoon. So mine's different than everybody else's, as you expect. So I'm the only one that does air in my group, but I'm also really lucky to have other liaisons like me that do different things. And then we're also integrated with our graphics, video, training and outreach programs. So not only that, but I'm allowed to be super integrated into our air program. In fact, I go to all the management team meetings and all of that stuff, because they want me there to hear what the issues are so that I can solve all their problems, is pretty much how it works. So one of the things that we were really realizing as we were setting up to figure out how were we going to get some of these things taken care of. So for instance, when I hear my staff coming, and they're not my staff, I don't manage anybody, but I have this like weird ownership of all the air quality people. But when my staff are coming to me saying like just like what Tony said, we're getting all these applications that are incomplete, or we're getting this industry group that doesn't really realize that they have these obligations. How can we handle this? How do we reach out to these people? And it's always a multi-pronged approach. There's never like a one size fits all. I think you guys all realize that. But one of the things that I just wanted to talk about is something that Mark Stoddard put in the chat about people feeling more comfortable going to other stakeholders or to other people besides the SB, because a lot of times we're state government, not all the time. I think you folks that are in universities and things like that and economic development areas have a little bit of leverage on those of us that are actually in the agency. And I think that trust goes a long way. So we sat down as a group and we were like, okay, who do these people usually trust? Who do they talk to first? Who can we sort of try to create a partnership or relationship with, so that folks that are coming in to start new small businesses or to get different permissions from a local municipality are hearing this first there, so that by the time they get to us, we are becoming one of those trusted resources that can help them. So one of the things that we did was we set up basically a bunch of meetings with our Michigan Chamber of Commerce and with our local municipalities, because this was a group of people that, like, although we integrated them in the past in some ways, we didn't like purposefully interact with them on some, specific topics. So we first did a thing that was kind of like, hey, we're the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. This is why you should care about us. And these are like the industries in your community that are permitted by us or regulated by us, and this is what you need to know about them. So it's a really interesting, the kind of questions that we got from that. And then we did a whole series, and it kind of continues, of local leaders conversations where we engage with municipalities. We've had like over 2,500 different municipal leaders separately coming to, I think we've had 12 of these sessions so far. We talk about very specific things, like we talk about dust from different kinds of operations, crushers, roads, asphalt handling, all of that kind of stuff. We've talked about marijuana, we've talked about breweries, we've talked about dry cleaners, we've talked about asbestos, we've talked about all these things that we know are in a lot of different communities. And what it's done is it's really created this great partnership where these local municipal leaders feel very comfortable talking to us. They feel very comfortable referring people that are coming to their community to us for help. And they're also really willing to pass out information that we give them about specific industries. So particularly with marijuana, as it came into Michigan, as Kaitlin knows, because we work really closely with her, it's one of those things that nobody knew anything about. We were kind of starting from scratch, and it was like, how do we engage at that local level where they're coming in and getting these permissions? That's the best place, really, like, because after they get a violation notice isn't really when we want to be talking to them, right? So I wanted to just kind of emphasize that in a way to just get you guys thinking about other partnerships that maybe you aren't engaging in that don't cost you any extra money. This isn't something that we did with any extra staff. You know, probably like everyone else, most all of our trainings and our webinars are free. And so we want to just create this space that's a safe space for them to come ask questions, that we can give them the technically correct answer. We can give them the resources that they might need. And then they can kind of become like this weird de facto expert that also has this, hey, here's this information that I know about. And also I have this really nice person named Jenifer that will help you walk through all the things that you need to know. So that's kind of what I wanted to highlight for this question, Troy. So thank you for passing that over.
Excellent. Thank you, Jenifer. So let's move on to the next question. And with any successful project or endeavor, we always face challenges, and there's always something that we can do better, we learn from. So that's the next question for each of our panelists is, what challenges did you face and what lessons did you learn? And let's go in the same order. So let's start with the Jenifer, number one.
Yeah, you hear that, Jenifer Dixon, number one.
I heard that, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. I'll be number two. You know that thing, first is the worst, second is the best. So, all right.
It's her extra N. Her extra N lets her go first.
All right.
And I do have to step away for 1 second. I'm going to come back, but I just want to let you guys know that. And I'm going to be very quiet.
All right. Thanks, guys. So as Tony mentioned, and I wrote this down because this is so true in everything that we're doing is, you know, as we're trying to do this stuff, we come up with ways to make compliance easier for the people we're working with. And that was something when we were coming up with the Green Brewery project, was something in the back of our minds the entire time. You know, we don't want to do this to make something more difficult for them, or make it something that's going to create, you know, more work for them. And so I think the biggest thing that we faced in coming up with this new project, first of all, was that we didn't know a lot about what we were doing. So we needed to really take a look at, you know, how did the industry work, and what were the processes, and what were the issues. And we really took a lot of time up front to get information from the industry, talking, face to face with them, doing these surveys to find out what are, if you were to implement this practice, how difficult would it be? And, how important is it to your industry? And we use the information from that survey then to come up with how we ranked, or how we gave point values for those different things. Or if there was going to be something that, all the breweries said this would be incredibly financially difficult for us to implement, then maybe we didn't include it at all, or gave it a very high point value. With that being said, the other challenge we faced with this is that there were multiple sizes of breweries within the state. So we have very, very tiny ones that have, are producing just a few barrels of beer. And then we have larger ones, not anywhere close to what Colorado or some of the other states have, but we have decent sized breweries in Iowa as well. So coming up with something that would be fair to all of them. And then making sure that we, like I mentioned, made this something that they would want to and be willing to do. So overcoming those, we, like I said, spent a lot of time at the beginning doing research. We looked at certified Bleak Green Denver. They have their brewery certification. We looked at that to kind of get some thoughts and ideas on that. And I think the biggest thing was just the communication between the Brewers Guild here in Iowa and the breweries to successfully launch and continue this program. So
Great. Thank you, Jenifer, number one. Let's go to Kaitlin.
Thanks. So I would say overall, the biggest challenge, I think, for our program and working with industries, and especially new industries, when we rotate through them, is overcoming that government stigma that they have that, like, I think everybody here can resonate with that feeling of like, you're coming in to help, you're not a regulator, you're not a compliance enforcement person. And it doesn't always go over so great when you're, hey, I'm government, I'm free, I'm here to help. You would think it would be a good message received, but you sort of have to overcome gaining their trust. And really how you do that is by showing value, showing that you can help their business, reduce their environmental impacts, and then also incorporating the aspect of the economic impacts of sustainability, showing them, well, if you implement this project to save on wastewater or on water usage, for instance, you're going to save money on water. Or if you implement this program where you capture your CO2 that's ending up as air emissions and sell it to somebody else, that has economic value and environmental value and community impact. So we really try to help them understand the aspects of sustainability and how it benefits them as a business to gain that trust. And then the other thing I would say with rotating through industries is it's really important to consolidate info specific to that industry. I saw a couple questions come in about like what air compliance applies to breweries. Breweries have that same question. They're like, what air compliance do I have? And they don't necessarily think right towards, boilers and grain elevators and cleaning solvents that they use and things like that. Their brain just doesn't go there. So if we can consolidate that information for compliance, that's really important. And then in addition to that, making sure that they understand their environmental impacts. I said, it was a huge knowledge gap for almost every brewery that I've worked with, that they have CO2 emissions from fermentation and that is a pollutant. And they're just letting it bubble into a water bucket on the floor without even thinking about it. Helping them understand that is an impact. And then also understanding the best management practices that they can apply going forward. And we always order our best management practices for, free, no cost, low cost, more behavioral changes first, and then sort of order our recommendations up to, capital investments like switching out LED lights or something like that. And then coach them through if they form a green team and track their metrics, if they start implementing these behavioral changes and can show, the energy before those actions and the energy used after those actions or water or whatever the metric is, they can show reduction, they can equate that to dollars saved. Then they can start to bank those dollars saved to invest in those later projects that have capital investment. They're like, well, I could never afford to do this. You sort of take that argument away from them by, well, if you continually improve your operation and bank your savings in 2 years, you can work on that LED light project or something like that. So the other lessons that we've learned is that working with trade organizations is really important. If you can find a local trade organization, like Jenifer mentioning her local Brewers Guild, I've worked with also national organizations on my project, like the National Cannabis Industry Association, to write a national report on all of the points I pretty much just covered. Those trade organizations will really save you a lot of time and let you focus on just consolidating the environmental info, things that you're good at. And then they essentially do the outreach for you. They'll help connect that information to their users or help recommend site visits to their users for you, or your certification program or things like that. So always find partnerships in whatever trade organization for the industry that you're working with. And then for the CO2 project, I would say challenges and things that the quick lessons that we learned was, don't be afraid to do something new. Don't be afraid to look at historically how breweries have operated for hundreds of years, thousands of years. Brewing hasn't really changed, and think about well, is there a waste stream that we're not addressing here, and how could we creatively address it? And I guess my advice is don't be afraid to be the first and try to work through those challenges every step of the way of unforeseen challenges. Like we had to go with a smaller tank, we realized, because the brewery had to be able to push the tank onto the truck, and then the marijuana operation had to be able to push the tank into their operation. So it needed to be on wheels and no more than 500 pounds so 2 people could push it. So small lessons along the way, and just being willing to adapt your plan and kind of roll with things as they come in, and don't be intimidated by it. There's usually always a solution. Another issue we ran into was having extra storage for CO2 at the beginning, because they were trying to test their current CO2 supply against this new CO2 supply and see if there was any differences. Well, that doubled their CO2 storage temporarily, and they had to approve that with the fire department. The fire department was very confused about why you would double CO2 storage at an operation that hasn't changed any of its outputs. So, writing a letter to the fire department to help them understand that this is good for the environment and why we're doing it, and that it's only temporary and things like that was another challenge we faced. So I think that's all.
Great. Thank you so much.
Well, that example I gave you really didn't have many challenges or lessons learned. Reason being, it's still almost exactly intact 23 years later. I was the air quality engineer who was having those problems. And so I knew exactly what the problem was and exactly how to fix it. And so when I brought that forward, everybody just loved it. There weren't any detractors or anything like that. So it went really well. But at that same time, I remember that I also got a hold of emission inventory data for the state. And when I parsed it out and found out that the Title V facilities represented 98% of all the criteria emissions for the entire state, it lit a fire under me. And I was like, wait a minute, and why are we doing all this stuff to small businesses when they're emitting everything, And I tried to take that to management and to leadership, and was shut down pretty hard. And, when you're new, and I didn't push back that much back then, I do a little bit more now. But yeah, they just shut me down and were like, we're not talking about that. Just pretend you didn't see it. It's not the time. And I let that sit. And it was probably 20 years later when we looked at our exemptions. And now we have some of the most generous exemptions in the country, 5 tons actual after controls for most things, pretty generous. And again, with the new data, even though all the Title V's had really reduced their emissions, as we all know, because that's where a lot of the money comes from, we found that around 1,400 small businesses could be exempted. And that they only represented 0.6% of the emissions for the entire state. So that eventually got done. I just had to wait a really long time for that.
That's great. Thank you. And then last but not least is, and I'm not going to call you Jenifer number 2.
You can. Second is the best. Whatever.
I will say Jenifer letter A. How about that?
Whatever. Oh, us Jenifers know that having the name Jenifer is just, it's the bane of our existence sometimes. But so I'm going to just talk a little bit about challenges in general, and I'll relate them back a little bit to this particular project that we worked on. But I find, for me personally, my biggest challenge is that I'm only one person, and I wish I could clone myself at least 5 times, because like I mentioned earlier, I'm very thankful to be so integrated with my program, but that's also really hard because they do literally expect me to help with everything. I help with every public meeting that our air quality division has, and that's not just moderating, it's looking at all the documents for plain language, which is a huge challenge in my small business type of role, because all of that is talking to different audiences, right? So incorporating plain language into all of everything that goes out of my division, working with multimedia stuff on some of our bigger high profile cases. It's just hard that there's not more of us that can do that work. So I would say that's really honestly the largest challenge that I have. And I'm really bad at saying no to things, and I need to get better at that. That's something that I'm working on. That's a lesson, work on saying no. But I think that I really appreciated what Kaitlin said. And I think that that's like taking risks for reward, right? We had this great keynote speaker last week at our water infrastructure conference, and one of her biggest messages, which also comes from Brene Brown, is courage over comfort, right? That's a lot of what our job is putting ourselves out there, solving problems, talking to diverse audiences for a lot of different reasons, translating very technical conversations into stuff that's very plain language that anybody can understand and that our small businesses can integrate, so that the public who might have this small business coming in next door also understands what that small business is doing. So I think that those are like the challenges to doing this work. And then I don't necessarily have this challenge, but I feel like a lot of y'all might have this challenge, and that's getting the yes from upper management, right? So like Tony said, you have these ideas, you know they're great, and you just need somebody to go like, okay. And you have to sit there and go like, this isn't going to cost a lot of money. This isn't going to be a lot of resources for people. This is going to help in all of these ways. And you still get the no. I'm definitely an ask forgiveness person. You probably all figured that out. But not everybody is like that. And I know I haven't been fired yet, and I'm often surprised, honestly, about that too. But I feel like that's definitely some of the challenges. But I do think the lesson in that is that we do have to take risks in order to see these rewards, in order to have our small businesses trust us, in order to have our local municipalities trust us, in order to have those trade associations go, yes, I will amplify your message because I know it's going to benefit my constituents. And that's all about relationships. So I would just kind of leave that with the biggest lesson that I've learned is that I'm good at making those connections, and that partnership is important, but it has to be propagated. You can't just make it one time and then expect it to last for years and years and years. So
Great. Thank you, Jenifer.
you're welcome, Troy.
Let's go to questions. And I haven't been monitoring the chat at all, so I'm not sure if anybody has been, but now would be a time to go to the chat and maybe ask a question that I guess hasn't been addressed yet. And while we're waiting for that, maybe I can pose to the panel some questions that we've pre-prepared. And we have, let's start with that first one. Has your organization changed or grown over the years? Wittenberg.
I don't get to be Jenifer #1 anymore. All right. So our program has definitely changed. I've been with our organization for 15 years. And when I first started, I was just one small person of a 6 full-time equivalent, all air focused group, which was a lot of fun. And I got to learn from a lot of great people when I first started. And we were at that time completing permit applications for facilities, completing the emission inventories for the facilities and things like that. So it was a lot more on like what I would say more of the consulting side of things, where we could physically complete that information or complete those things for businesses. Over the years, we went from 6 to 2.5 FTE. And that was primarily, I think it was Tony that mentioned Title V fees going down, or Title V emissions going down. So therefore the Title V fees went down as well, what they're collecting, and we're funded through the Iowa DNR Air Quality Bureau. And so therefore our funding was cut as a way of kind of helping with their budget on the Title V side of things. It was cut then again from 2.5 to 1.25, and that was the lowest that we were at one point in time. So obviously that made a pretty big impact on businesses. When those cuts were made, we switched from actually completing things for businesses to more of an education and training focus. So now we are creating more resources and tools and helping businesses complete those things on their own, which was a fun challenge in and of itself, especially when that person responsible for that, as many of you guys know, changes many times over the years. So here in Iowa, emission inventories are once every 3 years for businesses. Well, that same person might not be there. It might be a completely different person responsible for that. So that was a very big challenge for us when we shifted from, actually physically doing things for companies to training and education. Good news is we jumped up a little bit over the last couple years. We're at 1.75 FTE for the last 2 years, and next year we're going to be at 1.95. So working my way back up to some growth, and we're doing a lot of great things in conjunction with the Iowa DNR, doing some projects with them. They've identified some needs and how we can help with that. So we're located at the university. So that's Jenifer, I know, mentioned that earlier, kind of being, I think that is a benefit for us, and we are able to do some of those things, but we also do work very closely with our regulating agency, which is a great thing for the program.
All right. Thank you. Urso, what's going on at the Rocky Mountain State?
Oh, she muted herself,
Oh.
so she needs unmuted
Well, let's
again.
go to the Tar Heel State. Tony.
Yeah. We're down to about a quarter of where we were. And I don't want that to seem like I'm complaining at all, because number one is it taught me to be more efficient. There was another engineer, and when he left, I absorbed that. And then when Edith left, I absorbed her job too. And but like I mentioned with the exemptions, number one, I stopped doing as many one-on-one site visit personal assessments. And I started thinking, how can I help the most people at once? And so I started helping all the ready mix concrete plants and all of the cotton ginners, and just big groups, big sectors like that. And it's pretty good way to go. It really helped a lot. And so that happened. And then when the exemptions were made more generous, I don't have to do as much of that stuff anymore. Lots of times when I get a referral, yeah, maybe they had a permit, and maybe they had something in their permit that they were supposed to be doing and they didn't do it. So technically they're in trouble and they're going to get a notice violation or something. But oftentimes I'm able to go to air quality and say, yeah, they really shouldn't have had a permit in the first place, because technically they could be exempt. And what do you think about that? And lots of times they'll let them out of that. They'll be like, okay, yeah, we understand, we can deal with that. So I think that's actually kind of balanced each other out a little bit. Now, what I'd love to have is more, so I could do more multimedia, because all I am is air. And I spent a lot of time being on the permitting work group and the compliance work group and knowing exactly what's going on in air quality and not missing a thing. I'm one of the first to know all this kind of stuff, so I can be the first to help. If we could have somebody who could do that for water and waste, and that would be fantastic, but no funding for that.
All right. Thanks. Mitten State.
Oh, you're sweet. No offense, Kaitlin, but so this is really interesting, and I'm glad we have this question, because I think at least probably more than a handful of you remember Jim Ostrowski from this job. So he's my boss now, but I always say, like, I'm the new and improved Jim, because he did a lot of good, like, setting the stage. But also when him and his boss, Dave Fiedler, were doing this work, they did really literally set the stage for how compliance assistance could be done in Michigan. And they had like a really small program, and there was other people that kind of did compliance assistance stuff sort of on the side. But when Jim became the manager of our section, when I first started in 2015, I came from, I was an inspector for a long time, and then I came to this role. And we had myself, someone who is like me but does waste stuff, and then we had like our publications person and our marketing person, and that was it. And now we have 12 people. So interestingly, I think that we've seen like this ebb and flow with what our administration is and who's sitting in the governor's seat, as far as like what is the emphasis on compliance assistance and what does that look like. Our administration right now extremely values our program. Like every single time we have an all agency meeting, it's environmental support division, training and outreach are the best. And we are the best. Like I will say that we help our agency tell their story. And it's not just me. I mean, I think I do a decent job, but it's our whole group. It's our 12 people. We're now going to be adding another person. We just hired an environmental educator. We're going to be hiring someone who's going to help with community outreach so that we have that balance. Every single publication that our agency does comes through my group of people. We see all of them. So we get to help create this consistency and all this stuff. So it's been really great to see it growing. And I don't see that that's going to drop off for a long time. It's also great to have somebody who does remediation, somebody who does water, drinking water, oil and gas, waste, and then myself, because we can balance each other out and we can really work on these multimedia things that not a lot of other agencies get the opportunity to do. From a money standpoint, it really is a lot of cajoling to get that funding to fund those FTEs so that we can have those people, which is why I say AIR set the stage, we showed the value, and the other divisions were like, okay, well, we want that person to help us. So that's kind of how it worked out in Michigan anyway. Kaitlin's unmuted now, so she can talk.
Excellent. Let's go to the Centennial State.
Sure. So yeah, our program as far as funding and FTE goes has been the same for a very long time. We've only had 2 people doing the SBAP work, the compliance assistance work, and then we have a 0.25 FTE that's our small business ombudsman. With that, Christine Hofler, my counterpart, I think she's been with the program now, I'm going to say close to 20 years. I think we're getting there. And I've been with the program 11 years myself. Or actually only in SBAP, I think 8 of those 11 years at CDPHE, but still, I mean, we've been around for a while. So although we have limited resources and we still don't have a budget for anything besides ourselves, I would say we get better with experience. We're taking on new projects, we're taking on new approaches. We sort of went through the same evolution of going from doing things for businesses and filling out the forms for the businesses to more of a training approach, and just providing guidance documents. And then once our guidance documents were built up and robust, now we're back to a little bit of a balance of creating new guidance documents, but also really still helping people hands-on when they need it. There's still a lot of people that just cannot get through an engine A pen to save their life, which is fine. That's what we're here for. We still help them out with that. We've taken on new interesting projects, like Christine manages the VW settlement funds and how those get allocated in the state to electric fleet vehicle conversions and new charging stations. I've taken on projects with the brewing industry and the cannabis industries to really drive some national education in a way. So we're evolving, but we still, our program's still pretty much the same. Our job descriptions are the same. We're still balancing our assistance requests with our proactive, sort of outreach training. I don't know how we're still only 2 people. It blows my mind that we're able to manage the full state. And although we have a heavy focus on air, we also help with water and waste and even energy. So it's big shoes to fill, but it's a fun job.
Well, thank you. I'm going to preempt Chris and say that we have 3 minutes left, unless we have extra time. And so I understand, Nancy, you have some questions from the chat. So I'll turn it over to you. Maybe you can ask one of the panel and we can fit it in. And well, take it away, Nancy.
Oh gosh, I don't know which panel member to pick, but I think we kind of covered this one. But I just want to make sure. Belinda did ask about specific air quality regulations related to breweries. So certainly we know about the water and some of their waste, but are there other specific air quality issues other than the CO2 related to breweries that you can share?
I can share what we have found here in Iowa, what we address. Just real quick, I've shared it in the chat as well, but most of the breweries here in Iowa receive grain, whole kernel grain, and they grind it on site to use. So there's some grinding of grain. Some of those are directly have stacks or vents that go outside. Some of them are just internally vented. So depending on the operation and the size of it. Also, we have some of our larger ones that are receiving their grain via rail. or some with trucks. So they need a lot larger amount of grain. So there's some particulate dust emissions from those processes. Also, in general, the brewing process does have some emissions, not high at all, but there are some. And as I mentioned in a presentation that we worked with our Iowa DNR Air Quality Bureau prior to setting up this program to address those different areas and to identify what it would be that we need to look at when we're going to these places. So most of their emissions are very small. And so they can utilize in our state the small unit exemption option. So.
Is that pretty much the same with you, Kaitlin?
Yes. I would say, you know, the biggest compliance deficiency we saw at our breweries was them not being aware of their boiler size and needing to get an APEN for their boiler. But I will say a lot of the smaller breweries fit the boiler exemption where they were under like the 5 million MMBTU.
And then the other question, and I'll just mention it here, a question from me was if anyone working with chambers have heard that they may do outreach to their members regarding greenhouse gas emissions and the reporting that is proposed under the SEC. And that was our keynote speaker, who those recordings are posted on our website, linked to the agenda on the annual training web page. So I just want to encourage people, if you missed the keynote speaker on day one, to listen to that. It was very good. But has anyone else worked with chambers? I know Jenifer from Michigan was the one who spoke about working with their chamber and it being kind of an easy win for someone you don't necessarily think about reaching out to. But I also wondered if they start to reach out to their businesses about greenhouse gases, that could be a place where we could jump in and get involved too.
And I haven't heard that ours is necessarily doing that, Nancy, but I'll definitely report back if we hear that, and we can definitely ask too.
All right, thank you. I think we're at time, and I did promise a surprise. And if you look in the chat, Liz has posted a resource handout for you so you can use to follow up, and it'll be also posted in the agenda on the National SB website as well. So
Troy, I thought it was going to be chocolate or something. I thought I was going to get like a special delivery via drone with like a cupcake or some like little afternoon snack. No?
next year.
Here's your surprise. All the Jenifers are number one to me. I see we don't have Clark County, but we do have Wisconsin. Go Jenifers.
All right, thank you so much, panel.
Thank you,
you're
guys.
great. Your experience and your expertise really shined in your answers, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Great.
Chris.
Thank you, Troy and Tony, Kaitlin, and the two Jenifers. Thank you very much for the panel. That was great.